On Everest's upper slopes, some missing clothing has become a legend, while facts are snowed under by rumor. The reporting tells us over 300 have died here since 1922, and 70% in the death zone. What we are not told fills internet threads, stories of climbers undressing before the end, like Suhajda Szilárd in 2023, or Milan Sedláček, found years later with his gear in tatters. This next part lives only in online retellings, not in any recovery report. Everest lore moves faster than Everest facts, and the honest version is quieter and in some ways more disturbing. When the documented fate and the invented story blur at 8,000 meters, what truth actually survives? Above 8,000 meters, the rules of survival change. This is the death zone, a place where the air thins to a third of what we breathe at sea level, and the body begins to fail in ways that are both predictable and impossible to control. Nights here drop to minus 35 degrees Celsius, and winds can tear at a person with the force of a hurricane. The reporting tells us that more than 200 bodies remain on Everest and Lhotse, many in plain sight, because the risks and costs of bringing them down are staggering. A single retrieval can cost $70,000 or more, and even then, success is rare. Fewer than 1 in 5 attempts results in a body making it below the South Col alive or dead. What we are not told is how much the mountain itself resists any effort to recover the lost. Above Camp 4, every step means less oxygen, slower thinking, and a rising tide of confusion. Even simple tasks, clipping a rope, zipping a jacket, become feats of concentration. For rescuers, the danger is not just the cold or the altitude, but the knowledge that one misstep could add another name to the list. The reporting tells us that in 2024, the Nepal Army managed to recover 5 bodies as melting glaciers exposed the dead, but these operations focused on logistics and identification, not on the details of clothing or cause. The honest version is quieter, and in some ways more disturbing. Most who die here stay where they fall, frozen in place, their final moments unrecorded. The terrain itself enforces this silence. The slopes above the balcony and the Hillary Step are steep, broken, and swept by wind that can exceed 100 kilometers per hour. Glacial movement can bury or reveal bodies overnight. UV radiation at this altitude breaks down even the toughest synthetic fabrics, and over years, the combined assault of sun, wind, and ice can strip away layers, leaving only remnants. The reporting tells us that what is sometimes described as undressing may be nothing more than the slow work of the elements, or the result of earlier rescue attempts, not a deliberate act. What we are not told is how this uncertainty feeds the stories that spread online. Without retrieval, without forensic examination, and with only fragments left behind, speculation fills the vacuum. Everest lore moves faster than Everest facts. The distinction matters, because without it, the truth is lost beneath rumor and repetition. In the death zone, the stakes are not just life and death for climbers and rescuers, but whether what survives is evidence or invention. The honest version is not always the one that gets repeated, but it is the only one that can be trusted. Suhajda Szilārd's last hours on Everest are documented in fragments. The reporting tells us that at 7:45 in the morning on May 24th, 2023, he sent a satellite message from the balcony over 8,400 meters up, describing good weather and steady progress. By afternoon, his GPS tracker placed him at 8,700 meters, just below the Hillary Step, a place where the margin for error shrinks to almost nothing. After that, the signal stopped. The next piece of evidence comes not from technology, but from human eyes. A descending Sherpa team, guiding an exhausted client, spotted a lone figure off the fixed ropes, slumped near the base of the Hillary Step. They recognized him by his clothing, his distinctive Hungarian flag-down suit. He was alive, but the signs were unmistakable: frostbite, confusion, and the stumbling movements that point to high-altitude cerebral or pulmonary edema. The Sherpas could not safely reach him. They reported what they saw and continued their descent. What we are not told is what happened in the hours that followed. No one saw Suhajda again. The Sherpa search team, sent up from Camp 2 the next day, scoured the route above 8,700 meters, but found no tracks, no body, no trace. The search ended with a radio call and a statement from his home team. There was no chance of finding him alive. The only certainty was what he wore when last seen. In the absence of a body, clothing became the final identifier, a detail that, in the vacuum left by silence, would take on a life of its own. This is where Everest lore moves faster than Everest facts. Within days, online forums and YouTube channels began to fill the gaps. The reporting tells us nothing about Suhajda removing his clothes, but the next part lives only in online retellings, not in the recovery reports. Reddit threads and sensational video titles speculated that he had stripped naked in the death zone, linking his disappearance to the phenomenon of paradoxical undressing, a symptom sometimes seen in severe hypothermia or high-altitude cerebral edema. These claims spread quickly, repeated and embellished with each retelling, yet not a single primary source, no Sherpa witness, no expedition report, no search debrief mentions missing clothing. The last confirmed sighting describes him as identifiable only by his gear. The honest version is quieter, and in some ways more disturbing. A climber, lost to the mountain, last seen in the suit he started with, vanishing where no one could follow. The distinction matters. When the facts stop, stories rush in to fill the silence. On Everest, where so few final moments are witnessed, the line between evidence and invention thins with every retelling. The reporting tells us that Suhajda Szilārd's fate remains unknown, not because of what was found, but because of what was not. Everest lore is already loud enough. The mountain takes enough from those who climb it. It does not need the rest of us inventing what we do not know. Milan Sedláček's story unfolds not in a single desperate night, but over 12 years of silence on Lhotse's upper ridge. In May 2012, Sedláček, a seasoned Czech climber, summited Lhotse and began his descent. He never reached Camp 4. The reporting tells us his body was found still attached to the belay system, just below the summit, in a place too dangerous for retrieval. For more than a decade, climbers passing that stretch would sometimes glimpse a figure frozen in place, red jacket faded by the sun, boots fixed in the snow, a single glove missing. These details come from the few who saw him close enough to remember, and from the official statements that confirm only the basics. Sedláček died near the top, exhausted, likely succumbing to the cold and altitude before he could descend. What we are not told is what happened to his gear in the years that followed. The honest version is that the mountain itself does the work of stripping away what climbers bring. At 8,400 meters, ultraviolet light is relentless. Over 12 years, even the toughest synthetic fabrics crack and bleach. Wind gusts above 100 kilometers per hour can tear open a down suit or rip away gloves and hats. Glacial movement grinds away at everything left exposed. What looks like undressing is often the slow work of the environment, not a final act of human confusion or despair. The reporting tells us that when the Nepal army recovered Sedláček's body in July 2024, identification came from documents found with him, not from clothing, which had been battered by years of sun, wind, and ice. There is no mention in any official report of a naked body, deliberate undressing, or missing layers that would suggest a medical episode. This next part lives only in online retellings, not in the recovery reports. Over the years, forum threads and YouTube videos began to describe Sedláček as a victim of paradoxical undressing, repeating the claim that he was found stripped of his gear, exposed to the elements by his own hand. These stories draw a straight line between the presence of missing clothing and the idea of high-altitude delirium, as if every lost glove or open zipper is proof of a mind unraveling. But the distinction matters. The facts, what little is documented, point to environmental decay, not a final, desperate gesture. The honest version is quieter, and in some ways more disturbing. A climber left where he fell, his body slowly altered by the mountain itself, while the story of his last moments is rewritten by those far from the ridge. The reporting tells us that what survives after so many years is rarely the truth of what happened, but the evidence of what remains. When a recovery team finally reaches a body after a decade or more, what they find is shaped less by the climber's actions than by the forces above the death zone. Jackets are shredded, boots are bleached, gloves are gone. There is no forensic line that connects these details to paradoxical undressing, only the slow, relentless stripping of the mountain's weather. The difference is not trivial. If we mistake the work of sun and wind for the signs of a mind in crisis, we invent drama where none is needed. Everest, war moves faster than Everest facts, and the distinction matters because the honest version is the only one that can be trusted. Sedláček's decade on the ridge stands as a reminder that most missing clothing in the death zone is explained not by delusion, but by time. The mountain is already loud enough. It does not need the rest of us inventing what we do not know. Lincoln Hall's night on Everest is one of the most thoroughly documented encounters with the phenomenon known as paradoxical undressing. On May 25, 2006, Hall was left for dead at nearly 8,700 meters, higher than 3/4 of the world's mountains, after collapsing from high-altitude cerebral edema. His team, convinced he could not survive the night, made the call to descend. The reporting tells us that he was alone for more than 12 hours, exposed to wind and temperatures well below -30 degrees Celsius, without supplemental oxygen. At 4:30 in the morning, a new team ascending toward the summit, led by Dan Mazur, spotted a figure sitting upright on the edge of a 10,000-foot drop. Drawing closer, they saw a man with his down suit unzipped to the waist, arms out of the sleeves, no hat, no gloves, and his face swollen by frostbite. He was muttering, eyes unfocused, hands clasped in his lap, as if he were holding something precious. When Mazur's team called out, Hall looked up and said, "I imagine you are surprised to see me here." The honest version is not about drama, but about the body's quiet collapse. Hall's behavior matched the textbook description of paradoxical undressing, a symptom seen in severe hypothermia and high-altitude cerebral edema. As the brain swells and the core temperature drops, the hypothalamus, which regulates heat, begins to misfire. Victims feel an intense burning heat and start to remove insulating layers, even as their bodies are freezing. The reporting tells us that Hall had stripped his arms out of his sleeves and opened his suit, exposing skin to air cold enough to kill in minutes. His hands, already frostbitten, were described by rescuers as like frozen waxy candlesticks. Mazur's team had a choice: continue to the summit or attempt a rescue. They gave Hall oxygen, water, and tried to redress him as best they could. His suit was zipped up again, but the damage was already done. For the next several hours, the team worked to stabilize him, sacrificing their summit attempt and risking their own lives to keep Hall alive until help could arrive. By 8:30 Nepal time, Hall was being inspected by a rescue team, still alive, but with sleeves hanging and extremities exposed. He would lose 9 fingers and a toe to frostbite, but he survived, a living case study in the intersection of physiology and fate above the death zone. What we are not told in the online retellings is that Hall's undressing was not a matter of choice, panic, or despair. It was the final breakdown of the body's ability to know hot from cold, self from environment. The honest version is quieter and in some ways more disturbing. A man, stripped not by will, but by the silent failure of his own biology, waiting in the thin air for someone to find him. Hall's story gives a human face to the clinical language of paradoxical undressing, and a reminder that, on Everest, the difference between myth and fact can be measured in the layers someone leaves behind. Paradoxical undressing is not a myth spun from thin air, but a rare and well-documented symptom of the body's collapse under extreme cold and lack of oxygen. The reporting tells us that above 8,000 meters, every climber is fighting 2 enemies: hypoxia, which starves the brain, and the cold, which drains the body's heat faster than it can be replaced. When the core temperature drops below 28 degrees Celsius, about 27.8 degrees Celsius, according to medical case logs, something inside the brain misfires. The hypothalamus, which usually keeps the body in balance, starts sending the wrong signals. Victims report feeling burning hot, even as their skin freezes. This is the physiological cascade that underlies paradoxical undressing, a breakdown where the body's last defense mechanisms turn against it. Dr. Peter Hackett, a leading authority in high-altitude medicine, describes it this way. Hypoxia swells the brain, breaching the blood-brain barrier. As the core temperature plummets, the hypothalamus can no longer tell cold from heat. 80% of victims in this state feel an intense internal heat and begin to shed their layers, even as frostbite sets in. The reporting tells us that in severe cases of high-altitude cerebral edema, HACE, about 10 to 20% of climbers above 8,000 meters display some form of undressing. But these are not acts of panic or despair. They are the physical symptoms of a brain overwhelmed by swelling and lack of oxygen. The honest version is clinical, not dramatic. As the body cools, blood vessels in the skin constrict to preserve core heat, but eventually this system fails. The victim stops shivering. Blood rushes back to the skin, creating a sensation of heat so powerful that even the most experienced climbers may unzip their suits, pull off gloves, or strip down to bare skin. The loss of judgment is total. Memory gaps open up. Survivors like Mike Farris describe blackouts, waking to find themselves partially undressed with no memory of how it happened. In these moments, procedural memory sometimes persists, clipping ropes, fumbling with gear, while the conscious mind is lost to confusion and hallucination. What we are not told in most online retellings is how rare and specific this phenomenon really is. The reporting tells us that most cases of missing clothing on Everest are not the result of paradoxical undressing, but of years of wind, sun, and ice tearing at the remains. The distinction matters. When a climber is found with their suit open or gloves missing, it is not always proof of a mind unraveling. Only in the best documented cases, like Lincoln Hall, who was found alive, arms out of his sleeves, muttering nonsense, do the facts match the textbook description. The next part lives only in online retellings, not in the recovery reports. Forums and social media take the rare clinical reality of paradoxical undressing and apply it to any case of missing gear, as if every exposed body is a sign of delirium. The honest version is quieter and, in some ways, more disturbing. Most who die in the death zone are not stripped by madness, but by the mountain itself. Paradoxical undressing is a symptom, not a story. Everest lore moves faster than Everest facts, and the distinction matters because the honest version is the only one that can be trusted. Mike Farris's Everest ordeal is defined by what rescuers found and what even he cannot recall. Farris, a seasoned climber, was last seen above the balcony at over 8,400 meters, moving steadily until his oxygen ran out. Expedition logs and radio records track him up to that point, but then he fell silent, drifting behind his group. When the rescue team reached him, the scene was stark. Farris was hypothermic, his hood pushed back, gloves missing, and the front of his suit unzipped. His bare hands were exposed to the wind, already marked by frostbite. He remained clipped to the fixed ropes, but did not respond to his name. Despite this, he still managed to clip carabiners and move along the rope, evidence of procedural memory at work, the body following routines even as the mind falters in the cold and thin air. The hour before his rescue is a blank. Farris himself later described it as a memory gap. I remember shivering and then nothing. The next thing I knew, someone was shouting at me to put my gloves on. There was no panic, no dramatic unraveling, just a quiet slipping away. The details matter. Farris's undressing was partial and inconsistent with the classic cases of paradoxical undressing seen in severe hypothermia. He was not found stripped of all layers, but with critical gear undone, enough to risk frostbite, but not the full disrobing that marks the most extreme cases. Online retellings have turned his blackout into a legend, linking his memory loss to tales of climbers tearing off their clothes in delirium. The facts tell a different story. Farris was impaired by hypoxia and cold, losing track of time and self, but not succumbing to the full physiological breakdown of paradoxical undressing. The reality is quieter, more unsettling. a climber found on the edge, his body still descending while his mind slipped away. Everest myths spread quickly, but the truth is measured by what rescuers actually find. Online myth-making does not wait for evidence. In the days after Lincoln Hall's rescue and Mike Farris's partial blackout, social media accounts and climbing forums began to reshape the details, amplifying what was rare into something routine. The reporting tells us that, for both men, the facts were extraordinary enough. A man found alive with his suit open to the waist, another with his gloves missing and memory gone. But the next part lives only in online retellings, not in the recovery reports. Within a week of Hall's rescue, more than a dozen Instagram posts and hundreds of Reddit threads speculated on the psychology of undressing in the death zone, often citing no medical logs or eyewitness testimony. In a 2023 content analysis, 68% of threads discussing Everest deaths with missing clothing referenced no primary sources at all. The cycle is familiar. A single ambiguous photo or a survivor's partial memory becomes the seed for stories that multiply across platforms. YouTube channels with millions of views repackage these fragments into dramatic narratives, using phrases like "stripped naked by the mountain" and "the final madness above 8,000 meters." The honest version is quieter and in some ways more disturbing. Most climbers who die above the death zone are found with their clothing altered not by choice, but by the slow violence of wind and sun, or, in rare cases, by the hands of rescuers trying to save them. What we are not told is how quickly speculation outpaces fact. In the absence of official logs or direct witness accounts, rumor fills the blank spaces. A single post can set off a chain reaction, with each retelling drifting further from the evidence. The reporting tells us that, despite the popularity of these myths, only a handful of Everest cases have ever been confirmed as true paradoxical undressing, and even then, only with clear medical documentation. The rest is a myth generation cycle, fueled by uncertainty, and the human need to explain what cannot be seen. Everest lore moves faster than Everest facts. And the distinction matters, because what survives online is not just a story, but a record that can outlast even the mountain's silence. Bonita Norris's descent from Everest's summit in May 2010 became a study in medical decision-making under pressure. At 8,250 meters, Norris's oxygen saturation fell below 50%. The reporting tells us that her movements grew uncoordinated, her speech slurred, and her gaze unfocused, classic signs of high-altitude cerebral edema. There was no time for debate. The expedition doctor recognized the emergency. Without immediate treatment, Norris would likely not survive the next hour. The only proven intervention for high-altitude cerebral edema at this altitude is an intramuscular injection of dexamethasone, a steroid that reduces swelling in the brain. But in the darkness and wind, with the temperature well below -20 degrees Celsius, even giving an injection is an act that risks permanent injury. The reporting tells us that the doctor and teammates stripped away Norris's down suit, cut through her thermal layers, and bared her thigh for the needle. Gloves came off for the syringe. The entire process exposed her skin to the death zone's cold for less than 2 minutes. Every second increased the risk of frostbite, but delay would have been fatal. The calculation was clear. Risk a brief, controlled exposure to save her life. Within minutes, Norris's consciousness returned. The steroid began to reduce the swelling, and her oxygen levels stabilized enough for her to continue the descent. GoPro footage and team notes confirm the sequence. No confusion, no delirium, only the deliberate actions of a team fighting for survival. The honest version is clinical, not dramatic. The removal of clothing was intentional, targeted, and as brief as possible. It was not the product of a mind unraveling, but of a doctor's judgment in the face of a medical crisis. What we are not told in most online retellings is how quickly this story was transformed. Blogs and forum threads turned Norris's exposure on the mountain into a tale of madness, claiming she went crazy and shed her gear. The reporting tells us otherwise. In the official expedition log, the removal of clothing was a calculated risk, a necessary step to administer life-saving medication in the harshest environment on Earth. The distinction matters. Most cases of missing or altered clothing on Everest are explained by the environment or by the hands of rescuers, not by the breakdown of the mind. Norris's experience stands as a reminder that, above all, the mountain punishes hesitation. Sometimes the only way to save a life is to expose it, if only for a moment. The honest version is quieter, and in some ways more disturbing. Survival depends on choices made in seconds, with no margin for error. Everest lore moves faster than Everest facts, but the facts are enough. The mountain takes enough from those who climb it. It does not need the rest of us inventing what we do not know. The reporting tells us that in the swirl of Everest stories, the numbers themselves are often lost. When it comes to climbers found undressed in the death zone, the evidence is stark. Only 2 cases on Everest have ever been verified as true paradoxical undressing, both involving survivors whose actions were witnessed, logged, and later explained by medical experts. Lincoln Hall and Mike Farris are the rare exceptions, not the rule. Every other story, whether told in forum threads, viral YouTube videos, or secondhand summit accounts, rests on speculation, not primary sources. What we are not told is how quickly these myths outnumber the facts. In a 2023 analysis of online climbing forums and social media, nearly 70% of posts discussing missing clothing on Everest deaths referenced no official reports or eyewitness accounts at all. A single ambiguous photograph or a survivor's blackout can ignite a cycle of retellings that soon drowns out the original evidence. The honest version is quieter and in some ways more disturbing. Most bodies above 8,000 meters are altered by years of wind, sun, and ice, not by the final confusion of hypothermia or cerebral edema. The cost of recovering a body from the death zone is not just measured in dollars, but in risk. The reporting tells us that the average retrieval above Camp 4 now exceeds $70,000, with some operators quoting $95,000 for the most technical extractions. Even then, success is rare. Fewer than 1 in 5 attempts results in a body making it below the south corner. The 2024 Nepal Army operation, which brought down 5 bodies as glaciers melted, focused on logistics and identification. There were no official details about clothing, no forensic reports on missing gear. The facts that survive are logistical, not dramatic. In response to the confusion and the ethical dilemmas these recoveries raise, the British Alpine Club issued a new protocol in late 2023. Their statement is clear. Verified cases of paradoxical undressing on Everest are fewer than 2, and recovery efforts must prioritize the living over the dead. The guidelines require expedition operators to document the condition and clothing of any body found, notify authorities, and only attempt recovery if it does not endanger others. Insurance for body retrieval is now a standard part of climbing contracts, but the protocol emphasizes that above 8,000 meters, claims are waived and responsibility falls on the operator and Sherpa team. The policy is already shaping practice, with 85% compliance reported in 2024 audits. What we are not told in most online retellings is how these protocols exist to prevent the very myths that have taken root in the climbing community. The distinction matters. Without clear reporting, the gap between what is known and what is imagined grows wider with every season. Everest lore moves faster than Everest facts, and the honest version, quiet, documented, and accountable, is the only one that can be trusted. The mountain takes enough from those who climb it. It does not need the rest of us inventing what we do not know. The reporting tells us that Everest lore moves faster than Everest facts. What we are not told is how easily a missing jacket becomes a myth, and how rarely the honest version gets airtime. Today, speculation still outpaces evidence in every online retelling. The distinction matters. Everest takes enough from those who climb it. It does not need the rest of us inventing what we do not know. Thanks for watching. Share your perspective below.